The other day I was buying something from a non-native English speaker, and when they told me the price, they said 16. 60. And I was expecting it to be 60 or around there. And at first my brain processed the word as 16. 60. 16. 16. And my mind did a little bit of a pause and thought to myself, wait a second, that can't be right. Then I put myself in a different perspective and I thought about how much it should be and then reasoned, right, that he must have said 60, but that his English pronunciation was still a work in progress. I get it, I'm learning Spanish and my pronunciation sometimes is a little off. And so as a result, I gave him the proper amount and said a polite thank you and went about my day. And I was reflecting as I was going about my day, thinking of other people that would have had a challenge moment in that situation where their brain would not have done that extra processing step. And in fact, I thought about a specific instance from childhood that's not important to go into where this exact same thing happened, but it was about somebody saying pleat for plate. Do you want a pleat? And the person that I was with not comprehending and then getting agitated that they couldn't understand and then getting annoyed at the person who was speaking. And I think that this is a beautiful moment. By the way, I was super embarrassed of that incident. I think this is a beautiful illustration of the inner workings of the mind that are really important for us to understand. So this is metacognition. Understanding how your brain works is a critical part of being a reality shifter. And those that have advanced metacognition, I love it. I pride myself on it. It's almost like this internal discovery. It's one of my favorite things to understand how the mind works, other people's minds, and especially my own. And it helps to have a sense of humor and to be able to laugh at yourself. And what I've noticed is that now being a reality shifting coach for a significant number of people, enough to get data points for me to make this comparison, there are some people that can reality shift. And there are some people that really struggle with it, even though it appears to be, from an outside observer's perspective, that they are indeed reality shifting. There's something in their cognition that prevents them from actually recognizing that. And so I've spent a lot of time observing this phenomenon and trying to understand why this is and helping people through it, right? Not just like sitting in my armchair being like, tell me about all of your obstacles in your cognition and pay me for it too, thank you. No, it's not like that. It's like, oh, there's this obstacle. How do we get around this one? Okay, let me think of an exercise. Let me think of a different way to teach this. It's like, I love what I do. I really do. Anyway, so this extra processing step, some people have and some people don't. I have a budding theory, you've heard it before, that those who are neurodivergent have this step. I don't know if that's really true. It's more of like an intuitive theory. But those especially that, sorry, my autistic listeners, because of the thought rigidity, you have a tendency to be more locked in to your experience. And I'll cover that in a little bit later, hopefully, if I don't run out of time. And whereas those who are ADHD or gifted naturally have this ability, but it's not always turned on. And so we live in a society, or we used to, where that type of jumping around in your thoughts has been kind of looked down on. And those that are not clear cut with their communications, those that like to meander and go down circles and rabbit holes and connect back to it, conversation is like an art. And there are some people that really enjoy the exploration through conversation. And then we have to go to work and communicate with our bosses, communicate with our employees. And the more circular you are, the more securitous, I can't say that word. It's such a beautiful word too. The more roundabout you are, even if it's an elegant way of connecting a picture, if it takes you 30 minutes of being verbose to tell somebody what they should be doing if they are working under you, it's actually not rewarded and it's not appreciated. Like for most jobs and sometimes in relationships, if you take 30 minutes to tell somebody what's wrong, unless you're also with a neurodivergent partner, a lot of people don't like it. And so we learn how to be very clear cut. And as a former reductionist materialist, this was a struggle for me because I had to change the way I thought. But science needs you to be really, really crystal effing clear. And, prepositions matter. And so you have to be really precise with your language. That creates this suppression of some of these, this is my idea, some of these thought patterns that are naturally innate in the neurodivergent mind. And that repression and that, I call it bootstrapping to linearity. First we did this, second we did this, third we did this, first you do this, second you do this, third you do this. Okay, cut out all the extraneous fun details. That actually creates a rigidity to the natural thought cycle, which I think was really important in the Industrial Revolution, where we turned people into walking zombie machines and really compartmentalized roles in organizations, because the beast of corporations and the beast of business needed that. And as a result, we shaped people's minds and educational practices and communication styles, and we learn how to fit in. This is part of our survival, right? And as a result, we have created a lot of arbitrarily linearized thinking people that are afraid to be creative or think outside the box, or lest they get thrown out or fired. Or I remember one time I got let go from a job because I was too on the side. And they told me my dress style was too mod. I was working in this really conservative floral arrangement place. I think it was the only time I got fired, now that I think about it. It was really devastating for me. It was actually really tough, but I don't want to give that to you. I was really young and exploring my fashion and working in a very conservative store that thought my fashion tastes were too out there, even though I was shopping at mainstream stores. So there are real consequences to being too different, right? That some of us learn, and some of us have wounds around that need to be healed. Others are like total rebels, and they don't care about the consequences, or the consequences don't really affect them. You might be one of those listeners. And so as a result, maybe they didn't succumb to this linearized fashion of trying to fit in. And I think that that's great. We can learn from people like that. I'm that way now, but it took me a long time to get there. So everybody's journey is different. So the point is that we have these natural thought processes, and I believe that those who are naturally neurodivergent will have a tendency towards these. but they may be suppressed. And as a result, what happens is that when we encounter ambiguous situations, or when we encounter reality shifting, because we have entrained our brain to be linear and to be rational and to be logical, it's so boring. Like, it is important. I'm not saying throw away logic. It's super important, but it's the foundation of critical thought. But there needs to be an integration with divergent thinking as well. So we have convergent thinking, that's the logic. A follows B, C follows, etc., and the whole alphabet. And then you have the divergent, which is like, let me connect all of these disparate ideas and create this thought bubble of interconnected webs that are building up to a thesis. And let me try to communicate that to somebody. And it's beautiful, but there's a time and a place for different communication modalities and thought processes. And your goal is to not fit yourself into one singular box, but to actually be able to shift between the different boxes that are needed. And that is what upgrading yourself to the next level is about. It's not about, the good side or the bad side. Because then you're just shifting. You're just going to the other side. It's about integrating the duality. And that's how we level up to quantum consciousness. So when faced with communication, which goes through our senses, when faced with a potential reality shear or a reality shift, there is a thought process in our minds, which should be online, that says, wait a second, let me think about this from a different perspective. What else could it be? And this is part of cognitive flexibility. This is a prerequisite for cognitive flexibility. And I have an episode on this specifically, but I don't go into the metacognition aspect of it as much as I'm doing now. And so if you don't have that thought process running in tandem in the background when you receive sensory information, then you are going to stumble a lot. And this is probably reflected in your interpersonal relationships. If you become frustrated because you don't understand somebody, and then you hold it against the person that is communicating to you, it's normal, like we're all human. Well, most of us. I have some other listeners. How are you guys doing? I am developing a training program for you when the time is right. It's not the right time yet. So there is this locked in bias that human beings have, where oftentimes we assume that whatever comes into our sensory field or in our sensory awareness is truth, because many of us are operating from a singular point of awareness, which is we only remember this body and this life and one lifeline. And so everything that comes into that form gets built into this working model and the simulation. That's what leading neuroscientists are saying that our reality is. It's an individual simulation that we are somehow collectively also sharing. And so anything that comes into the eyes, the ears, etc., is then collapsed into this working model, which is already ongoing. And because of the orientation of the thought patterns of the human psyche, there is a propensity for humans to need continuity for whatever reason. Maybe it's just because we're used to it. I'm hoping that that's the case because I find it really effing boring. I really do. God, it drives me crazy sometimes. It's so slow. Everything is so slow in a world like that. Anyway, so most humans will actually construct their model of reality based on yesterday's reality and the day before that and the day before that. So even if and I get questions about this. I just answered one recently. Even if all timelines are operating simultaneously, which they are, the human mind has to upgrade itself to be able to handle switching among different timelines. Or else, what happens is that they maintain that single timeline, and I call this the continuity conundrum, because even when you want to break away from it, you can't unless you train yourself and practice it. And even then, it's still really hard. I still have it. And our world reinforces that because we have appointments that we have to go to. We have calendars. We have Christmas, So what happens is that very often this is an unconscious in the background process. And as a result, because of this default bias of just whatever comes into the senses is assumed to be true, even and complete. That's also a bias too. You're assuming that you're perceiving everything that is relevant to you, and we actually know that this is not the case. And so what happens is that when somebody is in a position of not being certain, guess what happens? Everything collapses into the preferred narrative, which is adjoined and affixed to the running simulation of reality that human being is operating from, which, if they're coming from a binary society, is very predictable, unidimensional, and quite mundane. Sorry. You can tell I have some frustrations about being trapped in binary societies. I deeply fear it, actually. And so as a result, if you then pair that with the lack of that perspective taking, some might call it theory of mind, but theory of mind is like, can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes? And I'm actually saying, can you take yourself and separate your perspective from all of the people and be almost like this observer, this third party observer that's then observing a situation and saying, oh, what should this be? Is it 16 or 60? It's a little bit different from the traditional theory of mind concept, which is the foundation of empathy, if you don't know. And also those with autism have struggles with this. So as a result, there is a tendency for that unconscious pattern to be frustrated at somebody else for your, not specifically you, but for your sensory system firing an error and saying, I don't understand. Did you mean 60? Did you mean 16? And if you are aggressive and unconscious and expressive about that, then, and this would be horrifying to me, you would be the type of person that would say, is it 60 or is it 16? Can you speak clearly, please? And then you embarrass everybody. Because you can't handle, again, not you, but people like this can't handle their sensory system throwing up ambiguity or throwing up a confusion error. So they operate in the world aggressively, holding everybody responsible for the crazy shit that we see on TV. And this is the result of, I believe, witch hunts, or leads into it, witch hunts and conspiracy theories and Salem witch trials and things of that nature. It's like we take all of the magic of reality shifting, and then we get, again, not us, but people who do this, get angry or confused at their anger, angry because they're confused, and then they start looking for people to blame and people to strike against because they don't know how to synthesize the fact that reality is not making sense to them, such as in the case of the Mandela effect. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, and it's a train that is like, I've described it before as a pack of rabid chihuahuas, roaming rabid chihuahuas. And so those of us now talking to you who have that extra function in the mind that is like, wait a second, could it be A or could it be B? They don't automatically collapse into A, and they don't try to force everything into A when they're confused. They actually sit in the middle and they see things from a higher perspective, and they're like, could it be that I am reality shifting? Could it be that there are two realities when I see the Mandela effect? Could it be that, right, there's a pause there, which is really, really important for the reality shifting journey. And I would argue that those of us that have that ability that isn't suppressed naturally go through the reality shifting process a lot more quickly and smoothly versus those other people who are more locked into their sensory experience in their unidimensional plane of existence do not. Okay, we'll talk soon.